Hey guys, Victoria here from Bumblebeans, and today my friend Kim is here because I was going to talk about my new book, but I thought it would be even better if someone who's already gotten a chance to peek at the book might ask me some questions about what she thinks that you guys might want to know about my new book. So I'm going to let her kind of direct what I'm going to talk about and tell you about my new book that's just shipping to me this week. So hopefully they'll be shipping out to you very soon. Okay? So Kim, thanks for coming to interview me today.
Yes.
Oh, look who else is coming to say hello. You gonna come here? Come here, look.
The toys up here.
The toys up here. Are you gonna come say hi? Yes, I thought so. Look, Jenny Egg's here to say hi too. Okay? All right. Okay, now you have to behave. Good luck with that.
Exactly.
Right?
So, what was the most sort of interesting discovery with this book?
Well, the first main thing that was an amazing discovery was when I made the first quilt, Double-Edged Love. It kind of happened all by accident. Well, not kind of. It certainly did happen by accident. I was looking for a pattern that I wanted to play with something that I hadn't made before, and I hadn't made a double wedding ring quilt. And I had made a quilt top out of a bunch of fabrics, right? Some of you have heard this story about my Double-Edged Love quilt, where I was playing with J. McCarroll fabrics, and I sort of just was playing with the fabrics to get an idea, slashed them and spliced them, and inserted some black fabrics and made an entire quilt top out of it. And then really wasn't pleased with where it went, and so I was looking at as a pattern of something that I hadn't made before, because I'm always looking to try to do something different when I'm making a quilt. And I had a double wedding ring pattern, so I thought, well, what happens if I just cut that quilt top apart? And I did that, and that was probably the most exciting, interesting thing that happened, because I was so taken aback by the negative space, because I had cut the double wedding ring apart different than what the traditional double wedding ring is. Because usually in the arcs is where you find all the color, and usually the concave squares and these inner melons are usually white. So I've kind of cut the fabrics in a non-traditional way, and that left me all this negative space in the arcs, which was just a total eye-opener for me. And I was getting those moments where all the hair stands up on your arms. Like when you're working on something and something just happens and it's just right.
And it did turn out to be a really exciting discovery.
It kind of did, yeah. And I just get the goosebumps all over when I talk about that, because everything just kind of fell into place after that. But the interesting thing for me was the way the curves in a double wedding ring, how it changes no matter, every single time that I drop fabric into a slightly different design double wedding ring gives a whole new idea, and there's such a crazy movement that goes on with the curves that I thought, there's more quilts I have to make. So every time I get an idea, I was making a note in my head, and I thought, I have to make another double wedding ring, and then the next thing I knew, I had 12 double wedding rings.
So is that what prompted the book then?
That's totally what prompted the book. I made all the quilts first, and had not even thought about doing a book at that time. And then the Wisconsin Quilt Museum knew I was making these quilts, and they wanted to exhibit them. And then I thought, if they're going to exhibit them, then maybe I should think about doing a book. Kind of backwards, but generally I'm not so much a pattern maker so much. I like to make one-of-a-kind, one-off kind of quilts. But when you make a double wedding ring, you certainly have to make a pattern anyway. So I already had the pattern, so it kind of was second nature then to just make the book, because I already had the patterns.
Well, so then that really brings us to the quilts in the book are amazing, and I think there are several of them that I'd want to duplicate or try out. But is that sort of the intention, is for people to duplicate the quilts in the book?
Probably not so much to duplicate my quilts. It's kind of like the same way that I did 15 Minutes of Play. I did that book because people kept saying, what are you thinking when you are making a quilt? How do you come up with these things when you're not using a pattern? Like, how are you building a quilt? And, how does it work in your brain, basically? So the first
And that
book,
is the interesting insight.
yeah, the first book is kind of based that way. Is to really get you to see how do I think and how am I working, and hopefully that'll rub off on people who are reading it, and to get inspired, and just really by looking, to look a little bit differently at even if you're a pattern maker, to look at your pattern slightly different, to see what else can you do with it that maybe wasn't intended to. So what I find is that if I can just change one thing within a pattern, that something completely different happens. And that's why I ended up with so many double wedding rings, because there's just so many different ways easily to manipulate one thing within a pattern and change it into something completely different.
That's
And
great.
That's
great.
just so exciting. So the patterns are in the book to make.
And I
quilts.
love that. In a big spread out, there's
Yeah.
a full spread pattern section here.
Yeah.
And
Big, huge sheet. So you have the patterns for the book that are of the quilts that are in the book.
And a lot of these pieces, because they're arcs or backgrounds, you've made them, quite large, so they wouldn't just fit on, in the page. You don't have to go and enlarge them or anything.
Right. So, the patterns are there, and then within each of the quilts is actually the story of what I was thinking about when I was designing the quilt. So,
Mhm.
which helps to lead to why did I pick the fabrics that I chose? Why did I pick the color palette that I did, or what was the reason behind?
So then you're really helping us to go on our own guided exploration with the patterns and everything there, but then to take it a little bit further.
Yeah, exactly. So you get to look at the pattern. There's a lot of detailed shots so that you can really look at the quilt, see what I did. You can hear the story about what I was thinking and how I was making those connections to help make the quilt come to its full circle moment. And one of the other things that I really like, when I talk about how you can just change one thing and you get a lot of different new designs.
Mm-hmm.
This quilt in particular, this is my Bright Lights Big City quilt. The pattern for this quilt is a blown up double wedding ring. You can probably see it pretty well there. It's quite a giant, I call it my Big Mama kind of pattern here, because she is a big fat arc on here, which gives me a lot of space to be able to play, because I like to be able to take those pattern pieces
It is. It's really cool.
And look at just what can I do different to that one shape, right? That's a 6.5-inch square. How many blocks can we have in our repertoire already that we could drop something else in there and then change the whole design of it? So I have a few different examples in the book of how this one pattern and lots of different ways to manipulate and change and drop your fabrics in, that's going to help tell a completely different story. Which, that's the thing that floats my boat. That's the thing that makes the hair stand up on my neck,
And it's great. I love the stories and the, your thought process that's in the book, and, it's in a very interesting order.
Yeah, and they're also very personal stories.
Mm.
That was a little bit odd for me, but it's the stuff that's going on in my head. All the quilts are based on memories of my childhood at my grandmother's, my grandparents. My grandmother was the one who was the crazy quilter who made the polyester quilts,
and there's a picture of those quilts and a couple of those quilts in there too,
there's
right?
Some new ones of hers
Very
that
nice.
I had not had in the first book that were quite surprising and beautiful that I found in my family, and inspired a few of the quilts. And it's funny, when I'm teaching and stuff on the road, I'm always trying to encourage people to find something new that you haven't done before, whether it's a new template or whatever. Even for myself, I had to find something that I hadn't really done before, and what I had. You have to go down because I have to show the quilt now. The one thing I did to get myself out of the box was to make some of my own fabric on this quilt. It's called You Are Here, and these are photographs that I took in Times Square, which is the area where I live, and stripped the color out of them, and then had fabric print them on my printer. I had them printed on spoon flour. I also went and got stamps and fabric paint and did some overstamping on them. I mean, really took this quilt to a different level, even on my own, about trying something new, because I hadn't ever really done that before. And then also trying to incorporate as many different things as possible. So I always have hand quilting or embroidery or machine quilting and my made fabric, and just trying to add many different elements, and still trying to find something that I haven't done before. See, this has a nice iridescent feel. It's actually raised too. It's puffy. It's like a mylar, kind of a metallic material in there, so trying to find materials that you haven't really used before. Just really encouraging people just to play and see, what else can you try? What's new? What haven't you done before?
Sure, and that's the exciting thing that keeps us quilting and that we look to.
It's fun.
Mm-hmm.
God, I hope so. I'm having fun. I hope it's fun. Is it still recording? I hope that's still recording.
I think so.
I think so.
Oh, yes.
Okay. All right, we're just checking because that would be really fun if we're just sitting here
If
talking
we're
to
just talking to ourselves, that would be fun too.
This is the quote that's on the cover of the book. Oh, it's going to kind of wash out in here. Greatest possible trust. Again, my grandmother did a lot of embroidery and handwork, which I really liked, and that's something else that I am always trying to incorporate in my quilts. So that's always another thing to look at my quilt and go, where can I add some other handwork that maybe you wouldn't expect to have there in the first place. So I love adding those little extra details. On this quilt, it was kind of fun because it was also about telling the story between modern and traditional. So the edges of the quilt change. I'm looking for little details like that where I can add in something that's going to be different from the other end of the quilt, where it doesn't have the little squares, right? Anything that's going to just help tell the story a little bit. I'm always looking for ways that play it up, find something that's maybe not the most conventional or traditional thing, and spark things up just a little bit.
Great.
Yeah. So, did you have a favorite quilt in the book?
I think if I had to pick a favorite, it would probably be the one on the cover, because I love the red and the combination, and like you said, the layers of embroidery, and there's even some applique in there.
The applique, there's modern quilting, some traditional quilting,
and a lot of your made fabric that in those gorgeous vintage fabrics that really just sparkle in there.
Yeah, that was a really fun one to make. That was the one that I was working on when I was working on Greatest Possible Trust, because the story on Greatest Possible Trust was about my grandmother, where I came from and where I am now. So Minnesota on the farm, working with my scraps, and living in New York City now. And that Greatest Possible Trust, the quilt on the cover, is based really on what if my grandmother and I had been able to make a quilt together. So I was trying to think of what happens when those two worlds would have collided. What would I have ended up with? And that's that quilt, and it tells that story in the book. So
it does.
Well, I'm very pleased. I can't wait for everybody to
absolutely
here and check them out.
Really inspiring book, and just so much to look at, but also so much to really get you thinking about what how you might want to interpret it even further, and lots of easy tools to help you with that.
Yeah, it's a discovery, because you know what? It's just fabric. You can cut it up. You can make a quilt top and then cut it apart and turn it into something else and make it really surprising and fantastic. And that's the way many of my quilts start, is by being a quilt top in one form, and then I've never finished it, and then going back and putting new eyes on it and looking at it and cutting it apart and turning it into something else. And that discovery, that's the best part about it.
Great. Well, thanks for talking to me about the book.
You're welcome. Thanks
asking me to talk with you guys.
Yeah.
And enjoy.
Yeah, thank you. And you can still order them on my website, and Amazon and CNT Publishing, and all of those places will have the book, and hopefully I'll be coming to your area sometime in the next year or two, and maybe you'll get to see some of them.